Hey there, listeners. This is your host, Trenz, signing in, and welcome to another episode of Trenz Podcast. For today's episode, I will be doing a book review of author Agatha Christie's books from the Hercule Poirot series. The title of these books are Peril at End House and After the Funeral. Without further ado, let's go on to the book review. Book number 1 for this episode. Peril at End House. Author Agatha Christie. Genre fiction, classics, crime, and mystery. 287 pages, and I started reading this book on the 10th of May 2022 and finished reading this book at the 11th of May 2022. And the format of the book was an ebook, and it has now become one of my favorites. I will definitely recommend reading this book. The story begins at the Majestic Hotel, where Hastings and Hercule Poirot are on vacation. They are discussing Poirot's retirement and how he just turned down a case from a political bigwig, much to Hastings' disappointment. After Poirot makes a point to say that nothing can tempt him to take a case, they then encounter Magdala Nick Buckley, a girl who apparently just survived 3 deathly accidents and 1 murder attempt this very day. The story has it all: crazy ex-husbands, drugs, secret engagements, secret panels, touristy Australians, poisoned chocolates, lost wills, missing airmen, sketchy maids, and 1 Belgian detective with his little grey cells. As the story progresses, you get more interested in keeping Nick safe from harm, that you miss all the little clues. Well, I know I did. That leads to a shocking plot twist ending. So read the book to find out. The second book in this book review. The title of the book is After the Funeral. The author is once again Agatha Christie. The genre is fiction, classic, crime, and mystery, and this book has 256 pages. I started reading this book on May 12, 2022, and finished reading this book on May 16, 2022. Once again, the format is an ebook. I will definitely recommend reading this book, and I also read this book in 2017. To me, it was very confusing book to read, as there is actually a whole family tree involved. Mrs. Helen Abernathy, aka Mrs. Leo Abernathy, Mrs. Maud and Mr. Timothy Abernathy, Mrs. Cora Lanskinay, younger sister of Mr. Richard Abernathy, George Crossfield, one of Mr. Richard Abernathy's nephews, Mrs. Rosamond Shane, niece of Mr. Richard Abernathy, and Mr. Michael Shane, her husband, Mrs. Susan Banks, another niece of Mr. Richard Abernathy, and her husband, Mr. Greg Banks, along with Mr. Entwistle, returned home after attending the funeral of Mr. Richard Abernathy. After saying that her brother had been murdered, Mrs. Cora Abernathy is promptly murdered when she returns home. In order to make sense of it all, Mr. Entwistle enlists the help of a certain Belgian detective with an egg-shaped head and superb set of little grey cells. And now it became also very confusing for me, because when I started reading this book this year, I thought, wait a minute, I already read this book. And then As I kept on reading, I remembered that I really did read this book and made it to the very end. And there are a lot of little clues that leads to the shocking conclusion of the story. And if you want to know how it all happened, read the book to find out. Hey there, listeners, that's all for today's episode on Trenz Podcast. For more book reviews, stay tuned for the next episode and keep on listening.